Okay. Am I still on mute?
You should press F5 to change it to the presentation mode. All right. So yes, so when you're ready, you can start.
Okay, everyone can hear me.
Yes, we are hearing you.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I wasn't on mute.
Okay.
Okay, good morning, guys. My name is Kendra Atchison. I'm a senior at the University of the District of Columbia, and my senior project title is Creating Safer Streets in DC Using Visual Analysis. So this is just my problem and approach. My problem statement is traffic and pedestrian fatalities in metropolitan cities like DC are increasing. Finding ways to decrease the number of fatalities is an integral part in keeping the city safe. Using car crash data collected in DC, I will construct a detailed analyzed report that will show that the number of fatalities and collisions can be reduced significantly. My approach utilizes data analysis skills, data mining, and data science. What really drew me to do this project is because I've done a few internships uh, analyzing data, and I really have a passion for just using data and figuring out how it can just improve the lives of people every day. I feel like moving forward in the future, data is going to be a real contender in trying to figure out improvements in just life. So some of the strengths, the importance of the project, reducing the number of fatalities, pedestrian and vehicular accidents can be a great benefit for DC. The accident data collected around the city can show high trends of traffic areas and how they can be improved. For knowledge and experience, stronger analytical skills, an extensive understanding of how data can improve the lives of people, and recognizing large patterns in data sets, and better comprehension of data mining. My strengths continued. The techniques that I used were data analysis skills, having a keen eye for detail and recognizing patterns. That was really important with doing this project. A lot of the times when I was looking at data, I had to make sure that the next time I looked at it, I wasn't seeing something completely different or something that didn't match up with what I saw the first time. So making sure that everything was on trend was super important. And for the analysis, because the data set was already in Excel, I just had to use some basic Excel commands for data mining some of the information. The data set was fairly large, so there were a lot of attributes in the set that I really didn't need. They would be useful for if I was doing something bigger, but a lot of it I didn't need. So having to kind of use and extract some of the data out was some of the basic things that I had to do. And also showing the changes or the percentages of data, which I'll show later in one of my slides. So the DC crash data, the data set that I use, the information was collected from 2006 through 2019. DC has an open data website that has like hundreds of data sets that just vary from different things throughout the city. I use Tableau's visual analysis software and of course Microsoft Excel, and the basic functions, just extracting some of the data. One column did have the date and time together in one. So I did have to extract both of them separately, have the date in one column and the time in one column. And also using the street address. I put the street name and quadrant in one column, and then also the block number in the separate column. My data set had about 63,000 rows and 60 columns once I added the additional columns to separate the two the date and the time, the street and the block number. And of course, for the analysis, large data sets, analyzing the trends, and then ultimately giving recommendations at the end based on what I've seen. So this is how I approached my analysis. There were a lot of ways that I wanted to go, but just for to keep it a little bit more simple, I started with the number of accidents per ward, showing the speeding involved and the fatalities and minor injuries. The data set actually has, I think, four different categories. So it has the fatalities, the minor injuries, the major injuries, and it also has the drivers and bicycles and pedestrians impaired. I didn't want to analyze all four of those because that would have been I would have run out of time doing all four. So for the project, I just decided to focus on the fatalities and the minor injuries because I feel like that shows a good kind of like a good range of accidents that unfortunately end in death, and then other accidents that just are kind of minor. Accidents based on the date, um, based on location, the time of day, and accidents based on the month and year. So the next couple of slides are just going to be pictures of the graphs that I got from using Tableau. So this first shows the number of accidents per ward. On the left is a map of DC. For those who aren't familiar with DC, it's separated into 8 wards. Each ward has its own number of neighborhoods, and this is just I wanted to structure it this way because I feel like it shows all the neighborhoods in DC without me missing anything. So for the number of accidents per ward, Ward 2 had the highest number at almost 15,000. Ward 5 was second and showing just a little bit under 10,000. Ward 3 had the lowest, which just a little bit over 4,000 accidents. And I should say this also includes just all the accidents. So this is the minor injuries, the major injuries, the pedestrian, the drivers, all accidents that happen are included in this number right here. So this is the fatal accidents per ward for bicyclists. It's pretty low. There aren't that many fatal bicycle accidents. Ward 1 did have the highest with 3. And then wards 2, 5, and 7 were right behind with 2. Wards 6 and 8 next with just 1. And then wards 3 and 4 were showing no data, meaning that there were no fatal accidents from the time. This is showing the minor injuries of bicyclists, which is very different. Now where most of them are pretty much way above the fatal injuries. Ward 2 is close to 180, with Ward 1 being second, just a little bit over 100. For the minor injuries, for the fatal injuries, Ward 3 and 4 had no data, but for the minor injuries, they finally do have some data. Ward 3 being a little over 20, and Ward 4 being a little bit over 40.
A tough time hearing you.
Ward 7 and 8 are right under 20 minor injuries. And also, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the data was from 2006 through 2019, but I'm looking at data solely from 2008 through 2018, so over a 10-year period. So this is the accidents per ward, the pedestrian fatalities. Ward 2, again, also has the highest with 6. Ward 7 is right behind with 4 fatal pedestrian fatalities. Ward 4 and 5 both have 3. Ward 3 showing no fatal pedestrian fatalities. And this is the minor injuries. So Ward 2, again, having the highest at almost 250. Ward 3 being the lowest, just having a little bit over 50 minor injuries. And wards 4 through 8 are pretty consistent about at 100 or below for the minor injuries for pedestrians. This shows the fatal drivers per ward. Ward 2 having the highest at almost 50. Ward 3, of course, being the lowest at around 5. Everything else is really around like 20 or less for the number of fatal pedestrians, and Ward 1 being at around 25. So these are the minor driver injuries, which is a little bit higher in this graph. Ward 2 actually isn't the highest. Ward 5 is at around 1900. Ward 1 and Ward 3 are both kind of the same, a little bit under 800. Ward 6 through 8 are actually pretty high, all above 1200. And then Ward 4 sits right under 1200. So this is showing the accidents per ward with speeding involved, which I found really interesting because Ward 2 has had the highest number of accidents in quite a few categories, but it's pretty low with the speeding involved, just a little over 200. Ward 7, however, has the most with almost 500 accidents involving speeding. Ward 3, of course, is still very low with less than 100. And Ward 5 is second with about 400 accidents. So this is accidents per month. This is actually a video because it was difficult to show every single month and year. So I'm just going to play the video and talk through it. Okay, so as you can see with with 2008, June had the highest number at around 43 accidents, and this is with speeding involved. 2009 had a lot of the warmer months having the highest number of speeding. May having almost 70. In 2010, a lot of the cooler winter months had higher number of speeding accidents. November being the highest. 2011 followed the same trend with October, November, and December having the highest, around almost 50. 2012 was a little more all over the place. August, October, and December having higher months, October being the most. 2013 was pretty standard across the board, with all of the accidents pretty much having around 30-ish. 2014 was also very similar, where it was all over the board with March, August, October, November having high numbers of accidents. Same with 2015, February, July, and December having high number of accidents. In 2016, July took the cake. It had 75 accidents, and everything else was pretty much under 30. 2017 was pretty low across the board, with all the months having less than 20 accidents. And 2018 was also pretty low, with having less than 20 accidents. All right, so this is showing the accidents by time per ward. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but as you can see, this is represented in military time. So this starts from 12 a.m. going down to 11 p.m. As you can see, 5 a.m. has a high number of accidents, and I'm actually going to explain why later in the PowerPoint. This has a high number of accidents. But even still, you can see as far as with Ward 3, it still is pretty low. I'm just going to look at the time from 6 to 10, which is really, I would think, rush hour times. But of course, Ward 3 is actually still pretty low, not showing that many accidents. Ward 2, which had the highest number of accidents in quite a few categories, was pretty average, most of them under 30 accidents. The highest in this category, I believe, is actually Ward 7. Ward 7 was pretty high in the morning category. Moving to the evening, which I would say rush hour probably starts in DC like around 3 o'clock and ends at maybe 7 or 6. Ward 2 did have a high number of accidents in the evening, right here. Ward 5 is also pretty high as well. They're almost close to 50. And Ward 7 was also pretty high as well. Okay, so this is actually showing the number of accidents per year. This is the fatal bicycle accidents and the minor bicycle injuries. As you can see, for the minor injuries from 2008 through 2011, there wasn't any data that was showed. And even for the fatal bicycle injuries for 2017, there were none. But for the minor injuries, there were over 150 minor bicycle injuries. So for the fatal driver and minor driver injuries, was also very similar to before. The fatal driver is really low. For 2018, it was low. In 2017, it looked like it was around maybe 15. But conversely, for the minor injuries, it was extremely high, over 1,500 for both 2017 and 2018. It was also pretty low across the board for 2011, the fatal driver incidents were actually over 60, which was really high. And the minor injuries were actually pretty low. Looks like around like 8 or 900. This shows the fatal pedestrian, the minor pedestrian injuries. For the fatal pedestrian, there was quite a bit of data missing for the the first few years. There were a lot of minor injuries though, all kind of near 100. 2016 and 17 had about seven fatal pedestrian accidents and over 150 minor accidents. In 2018, had about three with close to 150 minor injuries for pedestrians. Okay, so this is going to be my findings from my data. So with Ward 1, I'll just give an overview of the type of neighborhoods that are in the ward. So for those who are familiar with DC, you can kind of get a picture of like how the accidents, not how the neighborhood kind of looks or the culture of the neighborhood. So Ward 1 neighborhoods include Adams Morgan, Columbia Heights, and LaDroit Park. It's the smallest and most densely populated ward. As you can see right here in this picture, it's right in the middle. It had the second highest number of fatal pedestrian accidents. The highest number of accidents did occur on Georgia Avenue Northwest, which was 3, which represents about 12.5% of all the accidents that occurred, all the fatal pedestrian accidents. Other streets included U Street, Sherman Avenue, Columbia Road, Florida Avenue, Euclid Street, 14th and 16th Street Northwest with 2 accidents. And these are fatal pedestrian accidents. Okay, so with Ward 2 neighborhoods include Chinatown, DuPont Circle, Georgetown, Federal Triangle, and Downtown. Ward 2, as you all can see in the graphs, had the highest number of accidents in quite a few of the categories. The highest number of pedestrian fatalities. L Street Northwest, 7th Street, and U Street accounted for the driver fatalities about 16.7%. M Street, I Street, Massachusetts Avenue, 9th Street, 8th Street Northwest accounted for the fatal pedestrian fatalities at 16.67%. This actually makes a lot of sense, being as though this ward has a lot of tourist attractions, is very walkable. So having the high number of accidents in this area and a high number of pedestrian fatalities kind of matches up with the type of area that the neighborhood is, the neighborhood that the ward is. And these are the top streets for minor pedestrian injuries. 7th Street being the highest with 10, Pennsylvania Avenue, L and K Street, Massachusetts Avenue, M Street, 17th, and U Street. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar, but 7th Street Northwest is right in the middle of Chinatown. So there is, if you've been on there, you know there's a lot of pedestrian foot traffic. So this actually matches up well with the data. Okay, findings from data with Ward 3. Ward 3, of course, is where our school is located. So Willie Park, Van Ness, and Chevy Chase. It had the lowest number of accidents in each category. However, most of the accidents that did occur in this ward were on Wisconsin Avenue and Connecticut Avenue, which kind of makes sense because those are more of the main streets in Ward 3 that kind of lead the traffic in and out of the city. Ward 3 is pretty much, I would like to say, it's mostly residential. So for it to have low numbers actually makes sense based on the area. Okay, so from Ward 4, these neighborhoods have Brightwood, Fort Totten, Petworth, and Barnaby Woods. Most of these accidents occurred on Georgia Avenue and New Hampshire Avenue. If you aren't familiar, Georgia Avenue actually runs directly into Silver Spring as well. It's a pretty long street. So that represented about 13% of the accidents, and New Hampshire Avenue represented about 5%. I also have a picture of the graph right here. So this is just the minor injuries per driver. Georgia Avenue had a little bit over 80, and then also this is also Georgia Avenue. This graph, this bar right here, which is a little bit over 60 minor injuries. Okay, so from with Ward 5, that includes Ivy City, Fort Lincoln, Michigan Park, and Brooklyn. It had the highest number of minor injury drivers, second highest number of accidents that involved speeding, and the incidents on New York Avenue represented 4.5 of all minor injury drivers. So as you can see, New York Avenue right here had almost 90 minor injury drivers, and everything else pretty much. These are other streets that are located in the ward, just the top 10 streets in Ward 5 that had minor driver injuries. Okay, so with Ward 6, that includes Capitol Hill, Navy Yard, Noma, and Waterfront. It's pretty standard across all the categories. It didn't really have like higher numbers or low numbers. I did notice that the minor injury drivers were around 50. And the top two for this ward were both the interstates that go right through DC. And that accounts for 6% of all all the minor driver injuries in Ward 6. Okay, so with Ward 7, these neighborhoods include Kenworth, Danewood, Fort Davis, Fort DuPont, and Mayfair. Has the highest number of neighborhoods more than any ward. This ward has a bunch of different neighborhoods composed of it, and also had the highest number of accidents with speeding involved. Southern Avenue Southeast and Bennett Road Southeast both had 19 incidents of speeding involved separately, which equal to about 3.905% for each one of the streets. This is Ward 8, which includes Anacostia, Congress Heights, and Fairlawn. It pretty much had low averages across all the categories. But the highest number of driver incidents did occur on South Capitol Street, Southern Avenue, Stanton Road, 295, and Wheeler Road. This is interesting. I live in this ward, so most of these streets are actually main streets that lead out of the city. So it kind of makes sense as to why there's a bunch of accidents happening, because these are high traffic streets. This is the findings from the data from 2008 through 2018. These are just the minor injuries. As you can see for the bicyclists, it was pretty low in the beginning with showing no data, with 2017 having over 150 and 2018 being right at 150. With the minor injuries driver, it was pretty consistent throughout the board. And then in 2017 18, it went and rose up pretty high. The same for the minor pedestrian injuries. It was pretty standard, and then it increased in 2017 and dropped slightly in 2018. And these are minor injuries. So here are some discrepancies that I had with the data. A lot of the accidents didn't have it completely filled out. There were a lot of like null values that I had to make sure I didn't include in my data. Some of the accidents were labeled that they were too far away from the crash point, which also led to some inconsistencies as well. Time of crash was defaulted to 5 a.m. for many of the entries, which was like the chart that I had shown before, how we had the extremely high number of incidents in the 5 a.m. row, and everything else is pretty average. So that kind of also messed my data up just a little bit, the analysis that I wanted to do, because a lot of them were defaulted to 5 a.m. And the data was also different for a lot of the entries. So AVE and Avenue were treated as two separate entities. So if I wanted to look at, for instance, when I talked about Georgia Avenue, I would have to do Georgia AVE and Georgia AVE NUE. So it would show two different bars. Same thing for H Street. It would be HST and then HSTREET. So that kind of was a little annoying trying to make sure that I was getting the entire street or the data for the whole entire street and not just one half that was spelled a certain way. So these are some conclusions from the data. So many accidents that do occur in DC do not end in fatality. Most of them do have like minor injuries, which is a bit of a relief because that does kind of show you that at least people aren't, um, having fatal accidents in the city. That a lot of them are minor. Many of the accidents do occur on the busy DC streets and highways, as we've seen. Higher pedestrian areas have a lower chance of having an accident with speeding involved. For instance, because Ward 2 had high pedestrian accidents, but it had a low number of accidents with speeding. That goes to show you that in that area, which is Ward 2 in downtown, there's a light on every block. So unfortunately, the chance of you speeding is very low, but at the same time, it's a high number. It's an area for a high number of pedestrians to be injured or for an accident to occur. Accidents that are minor and fatal seem to be growing per year as DC population grows. Even though DC is on terms of trying to become a more walkable city, there are more people moving here, and there's also traffic that goes through DC for people who don't live here. So it does continue to grow. Ward 3 has the overall lowest number of incidents than any other ward, probably because it is mostly residential. So a lot of people aren't really speeding through there because there's a lot of homes and everything. Ward 2 had the highest number of minor incidents. Like I said, it's a very tourist area, so there's probably just a lot of incidents because of that. Increasing the number. Oh yeah, another thing is increasing the number of traffic calming initiatives in Ward 7 because they have the highest number of speeding accidents. So I believe that there should be increased, whether that's more cameras or speed humps or something that's making people slow down more in that area. And increasing safety measures on major streets within DC, which would seem pretty obvious because those are the streets that have the most traffic. But there should be more safety measures on those streets and not as far as more residential streets because there aren't that many accidents that are occurring on those streets. Also for Ward 7, increasing safety measures on Southern Avenue and Benning Road because those had the highest incidence of speeding. Those two streets had 19 accidents apiece for speeding. So there definitely should be more safety initiatives on that street as well, those two streets. And then Ward 4, increasing pedestrian safety measures because it had a high number of pedestrian incidents. So that could even be helped with having higher crosswalk times or wider sidewalks and crosswalks as well. And this is just the future work. I would really like to in the future analyze the data with an element of machine learning added. I believe that the data is showing me is just like me scratching the surface. There are a bunch of factors that go into why car accidents happen. So I would love to see whether I can predict how likely the accidents to happen with more factors added in. I look at other aspects of the data. It had a lot of really good useful information on there. They had accidents that had government vehicles, taxi drivers, major injury accidents to see whether or not that would be a difference from the fatal accidents or where people do lose their life to accidents where people do get really hurt. I would love to see whether there's a difference in between those. And using some other DC data as well, so just like age, distracted driving, aggressive driving, where drivers are, where they're from. Because, like I said, DC does have a lot of people who drive through the city, people who work from outside of the city who come in. So I would love to see whether that has an effect on the number of accidents as well. And that's the end of my PowerPoint.
Questions, please.
Hi. Yeah, I have a question. Do cyclists count as pedestrians, and were cyclist data tracked?
You said were the cyclists counted as pedestrians?
Yeah, like if a cyclist got hit, does that count as a pedestrian being hit, or are they like a separate category?
Yeah, so in the data they had them as a separate category. So they would have like minor bicycle injuries, major bicycle injuries, and then they had pedestrians in a separate one as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. This is, I think I live in DC too. Very interesting data and very good analysis. Question I have, or a question, or I guess it's a question. Did it also include data on the driver's license plate or where the driver came from? Like, was it Maryland, Virginia, or DC? And also, the other, I'm curious about the relation of the accidents and when there are speed cameras or red light cameras and things of that nature. I think that would be very interesting to crosswalk your data against those two data sets.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I wanted to do. The data didn't have like any information on the drivers, so not like their age or like where they were driving from, which I was hoping that it did because that would kind of further deepen my analysis. But yeah, I wish that there was some way that I could get access to that data.
All right, so thank you so much. So if you have any further question, you can directly contact each of the presenters. So, or if you would like to have, if you do not know how